I'm here with Daniel Enskat, who's Head of Global Consulting for Strategic Insight. Daniel presented a session yesterday at the Distribution Summit on distribution, and tomorrow you're presenting on 401ks and retirement issues.
Yes, I think I'm supposed to be the bad cop of that panel. It's tomorrow. It's a CEO panel, and it's interesting because the US, of course, with their 401k retirement industry, has always been sort of a leading indicator for the global fund industry. And I think in the last couple of years, in the last decade, that actually reversed, where you have seen a lot of developments coming out of Europe and out of Asia that are now being introduced in the US. So if you think about, for instance, companies like Aberdeen that have now bought companies in the US to introduce the emerging market theme into the US. But of course the 401k business, along with Australia's superannuation, there's still examples of how an industry can evolve into a retirement long-term savings industry, and that's of course also one of the themes that is being discussed here with the IFAMA and CSER initiative of promoting long-term savings. And so that's part of tomorrow's panel, where it's all about, is there a 401k type life cycle or fund-of-fund lifestyle vehicle that could lead the way into European retirement industry.
And to try and boost this problem we have of an aging population and not enough funds.
Yes. And the issue, I guess, also with, it's in Asia and Europe the same, and in Europe you actually indeed have less immigration as the US. So there's this issue of an aging population, and there's the issue of how do you switch on the one hand from a mentality where the government provides for the retirement to an individual defined contribution system, and then on the other hand also how do you switch the mentality from savers and savings to more investors, so bypassing maybe the speculators, which you have in Asia quite a bit. So there's this whole issue of how do you as an industry move from savings or speculative mindset to a long-term savings mindset, and what can the asset managers here do to promote that.
And yesterday you were presenting some research that you've done. There were some meta trends, I think.
Some meta trends,
Tell
yes.
me what a meta trend.
Well, we thought about long and hard about. There are mega trends, so some big things that influence the industry. But we actually think there are 3 or 4 meta trends that go beyond just the next couple of years, that really will influence on a long term how you think about the world. And what we do as a company is we look at the bottom, so the share class level, the individual product, and that's our day-to-day research. But we also try to look top-down, because the CEOs have to think about strategy. How does China? I did 2 weeks ago a panel with the chairman of Lazard and John Kerry, who heads in the U.S. Senate the Council of Foreign Relations, and it was a panel discussing U.S. and China. So you have the issue of them being competitors, but they also have to be collaborators, because if you think about the environment, then you can't just compete. You also have to work together, because while there are many countries in the world, clearly in terms of promoting or fighting against environmental progress, the US and China are the key countries to consider. So there are a lot of meta trends that we see. One of them is what you would consider I guess cash in the bank, and there's so much money on the sidelines.
That was extraordinary.
What do you do with that? There's about $60 trillion, and that's a longer term trend. What do you do with that? How do you work with that as an asset management industry? The second one is a global middle class. And
that was the extraordinary thing, I have to interrupt there, about the new Chinese private bank.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, that's a little anecdote, but it's one of the things that you come across so much when you work with, for me in your events here, whether it's in Brazil or in Asia. In China, we come across a very different mindset of investing. But at the same time, there's also now what is perceived as the golden opportunity and once in a lifetime chance for Asia to make an impact in Europe. So what we've seen, and that's just 2 examples out of many, you had the Singaporean wealth fund, sovereign wealth fund, Temasek and Fullerton as part of that, promoting UCITS in Europe to compete with European fund managers. And at the same time, you had Bank of China a couple of weeks ago opening a private bank in the middle of Geneva. Now that's the home of Lombard Odier and Pictet and all the private banks that have been around for hundreds of years. Now they come in and they hire the key partners from these private banks to really have a local front with Swiss private bankers heading it, but then they offer products like Swiss equity products that are denominated in renminbi. So you have a very interesting matrix of global trends that on the one hand are very big picture, but then when you go down into the details, it ends up with a fund like that. Or, as I said, with Aberdeen offering local emerging market debt portfolios in the US, where the big trends very quickly can also filter down to what do you actually do on the ground. And that's what we're trying to think through these days, because there are so many interdependencies and also so many opportunities. Because you have so much turnover and because so much more money goes to the people, the big winners, the blockbuster products, that it becomes not only a challenge, but also a very exciting time to think about the industry.
And going forward, do you think this industry is quite robust?
There are two things to this. One is, I think it's very robust. One of the things that we broke down, and I mentioned yesterday, and I think it was one of the slides that was heavily discussed afterwards, is you had $7.5 trillion in the last 10 years going to mutual funds. If you do that math very quickly, you end up with 750 billion a year, which is about 62 and a half a month, which is 2 billion a day. So we're talking for the last 10 years, every single day, you had net flows of $2 billion into the fund industry every day. And we had wars, we had natural disasters, we had terrorist attacks, we had all kinds of issues, subprime crisis and the like. That notwithstanding, you had 2 billion every day coming into this industry. So it is very robust, very, very robust. And especially as Europe and Asia thinks about a retiring industry and thinks about new demographics, let's say younger populations in Southeast Asia, in Eastern Europe, in China and India, and how to service them. It's very robust and there are a lot of opportunities. Having said that, in some areas the profit margins are shrinking, and in some areas of the business there's a concentration of success. So what we also see, and that's not new, but it's developing and accelerating faster, is that you have more turnover. So in a typical 5-year time period, you have about 2/3 of the leading fund managers changing.
Okay.
So the top league, the league tables and the top managers, when you go back to, I would say even the 1920s, so 85 years ago when the fund industry started, you go year after year. But if you do the exercise from the 80s on, 80, 85, 90, 95, etc., then anywhere in a specific region or globally, every 5 to 10 years, 2/3 of managers are exchanging. You see this with Carmignac. It's been discussed here as sort of this fairy tale of Europe.
Yes.
And I saw there's a King of Europe cover of some of the media. They, for 15 years, had 1 billion in assets.
Right.
And then within 1 year, they grew to 40 billion.
So this is a life cycle, natural life cycle?
It's not necessarily, because not everybody has the fairy tale, but you can exist for a decade or two doing the business that you believe in and nothing much happens, but then a circumstance or a situation happens where you have a subprime crisis, where you have severe distortions, and you are at the right place at the right time, and you can massively benefit from that. Now, in turn, of course, if you think of someone like Bill Gross in the US with his PIMCO product, he has now a $250 billion product and got last year 52 billion in net flows. That's a good problem to have, but unlike Carmignac, it's not a 1 year result. Since the 80s, he has gotten 5 or 6 or 7 billion in net flows every year. So there's some companies that are very successful over time, but there are also some that appear out of nowhere, and you have that all the time, and it's probably accelerating. So it's an exciting time to be in the fund industry.
Absolutely. And on a different note, tell me, what do you get from FundForum? Have you been many times before?
I am a little bit addicted to it, I guess. No, it's
you like addiction.
This is, I think, 20
in
years,
this instance.
right? Correct?
Yes, I think it is. Yeah.
So for the 20th year anniversary, over a decade, we have been part of it. So for about 12 or 13 years, we've been coming to the FundForum. We have been very excited to see that you're also branching out. So we've participated in the Latin American one, the Middle Eastern one, in the US version that you had. So in general, and it's not just because we're standing here in front of the new FundForum International 2010. You only have 1 or 2 conferences in the industry that everybody goes to. And this one for Europe is clearly the institution, the flagship conference that really everybody goes to. What has been difficult, I guess, for you, and what is something that you have to constantly do is reinvent yourself to keep the content fresh, to keep it interesting. That's why the new, I guess, comes up. And I see this year you have social media, you have Twittering,
social
and
media.
you know, you have questions,
we have video
emailing.
interviews, I've heard.
You really?
Yeah.
I don't know. I want to do one of those.
I think you should. You're a natural.
So it's something that that we are excited to see because many of our clients come to it, and at the same time, it's probably important also to see how they're different in each region.
Yeah.
Because I think the Monaco one, as a huge conference, is probably different than what you do in Sao Paulo or in Bahrain or elsewhere, because it depends on the market, the maturity of the market, and so. For us, at least, you know, I travel around a lot, so I always try to make room to come to your fund forums.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Dan Enskat from Strategic Insight.
Thank you, Bevan.